always think of competitive federalism was when Joe Bielke Peterson abolished, I thought it was an appalling tax, having been an article clerk in a law firm and seeing what misery it created. Death duties is a terrible tax because it comes at precisely the very wrong time for a small family business or a farm or something like that. It means they, having suffered the death of a leading person in the family, they then also find that about a third of the wealth, the value of whatever they've got, like a farm or so on, has to be paid to the state government. And Bielke Peterson abolished that, and it just encouraged the other states to look at their death duties too and to take similar measures. If we had more competitive federalism, as they have in America, for example, would it be better from the point of view of the economy?
Look, I think it probably would be. The problem is it's very hard to sort of unscramble the egg. I mean, obviously, you know, the reason why the states lost their income taxing powers during the Second World War, when they, you know, they decided to centralise it. And unfortunately, you know, as happens a lot in policy, once you make these changes, they become permanent. So yeah, we do have a situation where, yeah, and you know, where we have this, where the federal government unfortunately collects most of the revenue, but we also, it also creates problems because we have shared responsibility in so many areas, and it just ends up with buck passing. So, you know, we have shared responsibility in health. The state governments provide most of the hospitals and that sort of thing, but the federal government's also involved, and then they end up blaming each other. So whenever there's a poor outcome, the states will blame the federal government will blame the state government, and we end up being caught in the middle with bad outcomes. So we have sort of, you know, there's sort of like broken lines of responsibility where everyone's responsible, which means nobody's responsible. So yeah, unfortunately, look, it's an Australian disease, I think, a lot of these problems. And I think, honestly, the vertical fiscal imbalance, so that's basically this situation where I just explained where the federal government collects most of the tax revenue, but most of the costs fall on the state governments, is actually one of the major causes of a lot of the problems in the country. And I guarantee you, if the federal government was required to, say, pay $100,000 to the states per new permanent migrant that lands to cover their infrastructure costs and their health costs and that sort of stuff, there's no way the federal government would run this immigration policy the way it is, because it suddenly would be forced to not just gain the benefits from the increased tax revenue, also be forced to share some of the cost. But because they don't bear that cost, they keep running this ginormous program. And the most disappointing thing to me is, why is it that the, you know, premiers of, say, Victoria and New South Wales, who the two places that get the lion's share of the migrants, why are they teaming up to, you know, push back against the federal government on this immigration program? Because they're the ones bearing the cost. And that's the biggest conundrum I've got. Like, I've never understood why formerly Dan Andrews in Victoria was actually lobbying for more immigration rather than less. And, you know, Chris Minns, you know, seems to be fairly supportive of it as well, which is absurd because it's Sydney-siders who are getting raked over the coals with this. And the state governments, you know, the ones who can never build enough infrastructure and struggle financially. So, you know, I'm surprised the state governments don't push back harder against the feds.
It is surprising.